An academic, I would say there's arguments for and there's arguments against. However, on a basis of discussion and so on, I would now vote against, and I'd vote against quite strongly.
Yes, and why? What's your main reason for doing that?
Well, listening to the minister earlier, I sometimes got the sense that Ukraine was somewhere in the mid-Atlantic. It was completely devoid of place, of history, of its own context, and it's as if the European Union was dealing with something which was a tabula rasa, a completely empty space. That in fact, of course, we know that Ukraine has got deep links with its region, particularly with Russia, with its main manufacturing industrial economy was linked with Russia. Every single Ukrainian and Russian, almost all of them, have links, personal links. There's millions of Ukrainians working in Russia. This is not a blank space, and the European Union has not taken into account the larger context.
Okay, so you're in fact saying we in the West here are forgetting about cultural identity of Ukraine, about the history of Ukraine.
Economic links.
What is in that sense so wrong about this treaty? Because, as our Prime Minister says, it's only about trade.
Well, it's far more than that. As you can see, the actual it's a deep and comprehensive free trade area. It's huge. It covers far more than trade. It covers security. It covers foreign policy. It covers everything. With a country which already has deep links, I'm not saying that Ukraine doesn't have the sovereign choice. I'm not saying that the European Union shouldn't have close links with Ukraine. I want it. Obviously, the European Union with 500 million market, with a strong system of government, rule of law. This is what Ukraine desperately needs. This is not the way to do it, though.
Okay, so you say, I am in favor of deep links of EU with Ukraine, but you shouldn't do it with this treaty.
Absolutely. I think this treaty is actually exacerbating it, because when people say Ukraine wants this Western choice and so on, of course we all want good government, strong economy and so on. But on the other hand, Ukraine really is a torn society. It's a divided society. And at the moment, in particular, there's a conflict. There's a conflict going on. We know about Crimea, but also in the Donbass and elsewhere. And this is a government also in Ukraine, which is a deeply ultra-nationalist government. It is not a government which can unite the people, all the people. That is all of its many, I say joyous, different sort of variety and plurality of the culture and the society.
You say this country is being torn apart at the moment still. There is a majority in the Ukrainian people saying we are in favor of this treaty. 52.7% of the people in Ukraine are for this treaty.
Yes. No, absolutely. These figures, of course, change. But at the same time, there's a very large proportion. Obviously, at the moment, in condition of intense polarization, the European choice seems to be a way for the Ukrainians, a way to escape their history and their geopolitical context. And indeed, it isn't. This is not going to be the panacea, because ultimately, the European Union is committing itself to something with a government itself which is bitterly divisive. And ultimately, it's absolutely astonishing that the European Union is endorsing behaviour which runs against its very basis, its norms, and its actually laws and so on, in terms of media suppression within Ukraine and so on.
Yes, so what you're in fact saying is it's a lawless country, it's a country infected with corruption, and ultranationalists are in power there. But wouldn't you say then that it would be a good step to try and change that, especially for those people who want it?
Absolutely. I would love to see it changed, but you have to do it in partnership with all of those concerned. At the moment, this treaty is deeply geopolitical. It's obviously the child of the Eastern Partnership, an Eastern Partnership which was launched in May 2009, was very explicitly devised by its architects, that is Radek Sikorski, the former Polish foreign minister, and Carl Bildt from Sweden, as a geopolitical way of pushing Ukraine away from Russia, away from its traditional links and so on. And it's astonishing that the European Union is endorsing this divisive and bitterly hostile. What the European Union really should do to ensure the success of Ukraine, which we all want to see, a peaceful, developing Ukraine, is to establish a larger framework for this to happen. And this has to be done in partnership with all what we call the stakeholders. And obviously the Moscow is one of those important stakeholders to try to save Ukrainian industry.
So what you're in fact saying is the EU, is forgetting about Putin. And you can't do this one-sidedly. You can't say as EU we do this with Ukraine. You have to involve other partners like Mr. Putin. Now, shall we? The Vice Prime Minister is still here, over there. Mr. Ascher, what's your reaction to what Mr. Sakwa is saying here about Putin?
Well, with all due respect, of course, to the professor, I think the reasoning in itself is a bit strange, a bit odd, because, in fact, it's almost treated like a Russian colony. I think this is a sovereign nation that desperately wants change. The LGBT community, the Jewish community, anti-corruption agencies, they are all very desperate to get the change, and this treaty helps them. It will not solve everything, it's not a panacea, but it helps them make changes that are necessary. A broad majority of a sovereign nation asks for working together with the European Union. And the argument of the professor is, let's not do that, let's ask Moscow. If we had done that, the Prague Spring would be in vain. The eastern part of Germany would still be under Russian control. This is strange. I think it would be much better if the Ukraine would work together both with the European Union and Russia. But the ones who are against that right now is Russia itself, is Putin.
I agree that Ukraine is a sovereign nation, but it isn't a sovereign nation in the middle of nowhere. It has long links and so on, and what this agreement does is fail to take into account. Now, I agree that Moscow should not have a veto on the choices of Ukraine, but what you're saying is effectively perpetuating the logic which has brought Europe into war again. The people in the Donbass, quite clearly have their views. They're not simply Moscow stooges. We all know that they've had their views.